All right, so now that you know how to do things with data, you know how to store them in variables, it's going to be really helpful to be able to get unique data. So for example, if you gave a Python program to one of your friends and you wanted them to be able to change it with their data, let's say that it was you're trying to calculate how old they are based on the year they were born. You wouldn't want them to actually have to open up that file and change the code. You would want them to just run the program and have the program prompt them for the year that they were born in. So what we really need are some special functions that Python has built in to be able to retrieve user data and then manipulate it so that we can work with it. And this will all make sense as we go through this lesson. But basically what these are functions. And if you remember in algebra, the days of algebra, that you may have seen something that looked a lot like this line here that I've highlighted. This is a function, and if we were to plug in values to this function, we would be able to create a graph based on all those values. So the function f here is 3x plus 2. So if we were to plug in 3 here of f, so f of 3, you see how we just plugged in 3 to our x, our variable, and now it's 3 times 3 plus 2 is 11. So that is essentially a function in math, but programming has functions as well. And you're going to learn how to call them. Eventually you'll learn how to create your own, but at first we're just going to use the ones that Python has provided for us. So to get started, the first thing that we might be interested in is to be able to receive things from the user. So this raw input function that you see here, what it does is it takes something to print out to the user, some prompt, and then what it does is it returns a value, and I like to think of it like this, where it spits something out the left and we assign it using this equals operator. This is an operator. And the two operands are this variable and this function. So it spits the result of raw input and stores it in this variable. And what it stores, the data type that it stores, is a string. It is always a string. So you have to be careful when you are using raw input. And I'll show you some examples of that. But let's say that we wanted to store something from raw input. So tell me something. So what we want to print out to the user is this string. You can see how it's in quotes. Tell me something, and we want to store the result in message. Then let's just print out the message. So let's try running that. It's going to say my name is Reed, and it's just going to spit it right back out. It's going to say my name is Reed. So you can see how we stored the result in message and then we just printed it right back out. So this is essentially just an echo program. So whatever you type in, it will print out. So not incredibly interesting, but that function is going to be very useful as you begin to write some of your programs. But you got to be careful. Like I said, sometimes you might have, like for example, if you wanted to know the year that someone was born in, well, for example, let's just do age first. I think a while ago I mentioned that we did a program where it was they would type in their name, or sorry, their age. I'm having a hard time here thinking and talking. So, excuse me. So they give me their age. I'm going to store it in age, and then let's say if they were born on leap day, then we could print out their age divided by 4. So let's try running that program. Just so you know, it's not going to work. We'll see why. So it's going to say unsupported operand types for the divide operator. So it's saying this divide operator doesn't work on a string and an int. And here we've had a string and an int. But age, I put in what I put in right here. I put in 26. That looks like a number to me. But if you remember, raw input always returns a string. So you cannot divide a string and a number and an int. So what we need to do is we actually need to turn this into an int. And sorry, I'm doing these out of order. So we look at this function, int takes a string, I've got these quotes, and it turns it, one word we use to call this is parse. It tries to parse that string into an integer. So I hope that makes sense. So now when I run it, it should probably work. So I would be 6 years old if I were born on leap day, because I would have only had a birthday every 4 years. So that's how we could do something like that. It also gets tricky when you want to do something like you want to. So let's write another program. So we'll comment this one out. Oh. So let's say that we want to see how old someone is based on the year they were born. So we'll have year Okay, so we're going to ask them what year they were born in. We're going to store that, and then we're going to print you are X number of years old. So it is 2015, so then we subtract year. We're going to want a space right there too. So now it's going to evaluate 2015 minus year. We're going to try to concatenate that with you are, and then we're going to concatenate years old. And you're probably thinking, just because you're really on top of it, that that's probably not going to work either. So I was born in 1989. It's going to tell me I cannot concatenate a string and an int. So now if we look at that, it's going to say, okay, we need to turn the result of this into a string. So that's what this one does. If we look at it, it takes a number and it turns it into a string. So now let's try it. And I still don't think this is going to work. Oh. It's going to say, unsupported operand type for the minus. You cannot subtract an int and a string. So this one was a little tricky because year, we did the same thing we did up here. Year is a string. So what we have to do is we have to turn that one into an int. So here we're using two special functions. We have to turn the string into an integer so that we can do this subtraction, and then we have to turn the result of that into a string so that we can do this concatenation. Now when we do that, it should say I am 26 years old. And since this is December, it's really handy because it will almost always be right. If you were born on December 15th, this would be wrong. but I was not. So I am actually 26. So and the same thing could be said. So if I wanted to be able to print my height, let's say that my height is, how many inches are you? So I'm going to ask the user, how many inches are you? Which is a funny way of saying it, but I think in some languages they do that. So how many inches are you? I'm going to store it in my height, and I'm going to print my height. And I'm actually going to print type of my height and my height. Okay, so now when I run this program, I am 5'10" or 5'11" and 15/16. And so that is, I am 71.9375 inches tall. And so first of all, so what this printed out is it's saying the type is a string and the value is 71.9375. So what we really want to do, if we wanted to really store this correctly, then I would want to store that as a float. So this is kind of interesting. I'm storing the result of one function call, and it's going right into another function call. So you can see this one takes a string, raw input outputs a string, and then I'm just going to parse. This is again, I'm parsing that string as a float. Now if I run it again, 71.9375, it's a float. And then lastly, something that's pretty handy is to say, I'm just going to print this one right out. Let's see. What is your name? And then I'm going to just print your name is, and then I'm going to call the length function. So raw input produces a string, length takes a string, and then I'm going to concatenate this result here that I'm from this all this function call. I'm going to concatenate it with this, and then okay. So I hope this all makes sense. If you need to take a look at it really fast, it doesn't like it. Okay, I forgot an operator. You got to be careful with that. So now if we run that program, cannot concatenate string and int objects. So length produces an int. So we got to be careful. So we actually need to turn that into a string. Wasn't thinking about that. So your name is 4 characters long. So I hope that those special functions make sense. They're things that you will probably need as you begin programming. Like I said, Python has these built-in functions. There's actually quite a few of them. If you go to docs.python.org and then 2, because we're in Python 2.7, so Python 2, then you can see that there are lots. So like there's the absolute value. What it does is it takes a positive or a negative number, and it just makes it a positive number. It makes it the absolute value. So I mean, there's just tons of functions that you can use. So if you come here, you can look at some. There's just lots. And honestly, the way that you'll probably find it is just by Googling, how do I get the length of a string or something like that. So anyway, but that's hopefully that's helpful. You're going to use functions all the time, and so knowing how to call them and use them is really important. So